You're calling from a 847 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Michael. This is Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. How's it going?
Good, good. I've found, by the way, just chiming in on what the other caller said.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain people in my life who I just don't talk about politics with.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, although I have found that, particularly with one of my Republican friends, we were talking about I think the immigration stuff, and he's actually like, once we were not in like a tense, heated debate about this, he's actually for open borders. And so I think the common ground thing is bullshit. I've heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, can't you find common ground?" But there are certain aspects, if you actually, depending on how you approach it, that you can actually find some common ground, and then you can go on to sort of like either try to change their mind, or I guess coming from where you're, or telling them where you're coming from, if you approach it in a sort of less argumentative way, I've found, at least.
I also think there's a different. I also think sometimes you can tell the difference between people who are really reactive because, they're Mark Meadows and they're far gone, and sometimes people, and again, I'm drawing on the Israel-Palestine stuff. Sometimes that real extreme level of defensiveness is actually like because they're steps away from actually being like, you know what, this is actually really unacceptable. So you kind of have to gauge that. Anyways, Josh, what else is on your mind?
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk about what happened with the Labour Party, if that's okay, and
sure.
Get your thoughts on their latest move.
Okay.
So a lot of people know, there was the independent group that formed recently. I think it was 4 or 5 people from Labour, along with 2 or 3 people from the Conservatives, stepped down and formed this stupid group. And of course, they were met with backlash by Sadiq Khan, who's probably the most popular politician in London, or one of the most popular politicians in England. And I think their primary reason was about being for a people's referendum. Labour recently is proposing a people's referendum. They just came out in favor of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good idea, but what do you think? 'Cause I think it basically just calls them out on the fact that this whole defection had nothing to do with the people's referendum, everything to do with Jeremy Corbyn.
So the people's referendum, just to be clear, basically is voting on Brexit again. I think that, look, your read on it is 100% right. There's no doubt that this isn't about Brexit. It's about Corbyn, and it's about this religious devotion to this idea of quote-unquote centrist politics that only exists in these very elite spaces. And I've talked about this in a variety of ways, and I won't kind of restate everything, but all of the polling indicates, whether we're talking about the United States or the UK, that there is not some, right-wing economic but socially moderate silent majority out there at all. If anything, it's the opposite. So, it's all about hating Corbyn, and it's all about not wanting to reverse austerity and do something to deal with the structural crises in the UK. I think that on one hand, you got to say, look, you can't. The United Kingdom has been in crisis for several years and before Brexit because of austerity and because of the massive increases in poverty and inequality. And of course, the inequality goes back decades, and it's the neoliberal turn and deregulation and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
But there has been a massive increase in just raw human suffering under the Tory governments going back to 2010 when the David Cameron, Nick Clegg coalition government came to power. So the UK, there isn't just every time you have a conversation about a future-oriented crisis that is completely negating a current one, be really skeptical. And then that being said, Brexit is obviously a really bad idea. And the left case against Brexit wasn't what was being voted on, and it wasn't on the table. So sure, have another vote, but there should be elections first. That's first and foremost. Get an extension on Brexit, have elections, have a legitimate government in place, and then you can go and take it again to the people. I will say, though, I'm not convinced that Brexit, I mean,
no, neither am I.
It might win again. And that's the other calculus. And it shows, the elite discourse is so delusional because they're talking as if, and look, it would be a different political reality. If the polls were like, look, this is going to win by over 20%, and everybody in the UK gets that this was a tremendously stupid thing to do. But all that's happening, actually, the polls haven't moved. Most people still actually even support Brexit even now. And the only thing, I mean, not a big, a tiny polarity, but but it won by a tiny polarity, right? And the whole impetus of the same group of people
against negative polling.
And this was the same group of people that this vote was registering against to begin with, right? So just like with Trump, it's a fusion of, it's a foundation of xenophobia for sure, but it's also a broad, there is no mistake that the top keyword search in Google after Brexit was what's Brexit in the United Kingdom. There was tons of people, probably even more so than Trump, I would actually wager, because it's a referendum and it sounds technical, that literally were just like, fuck you. If you're Tony Blair, if you're the BBC, if you're David Cameron, if you're, Ed Miliband, fuck you. And as things have gotten even worse, there's just no indication to me that this is actually like an escape route. So, Brexit was a terrible idea. It shouldn't happen. The UK actually was in a relatively privileged position relative to relative to other countries in the EU. The way the EU is constituted definitely would harm the ability of a government to be truly democratically socialist and progressive. But given what was on the table, it was the wrong vote. It was a bad decision. But the people who are running around saying that, we should just have another referendum are, as with every single other move they've made, not reading the politics correctly. So, I'm not opposed to it, and I think Labor does need to have a stronger position on it, but I think it's a fantasy to think that this is some type of done deal.
Yeah.
And if that loses, then that is that's even worse. Let me just put it simply, right?
Yeah.
So there you go.
I think it's worse. Yeah. I think also what you need is someone like a prime minister, if they're not going to get a better deal than what they're going to get from the EU. The EU just won't budge. What you're going to need is possibly a prime minister just to put their foot down and say, we're not going to do this for the good of the country. We're not going to do a Brexit. I think that's what you would need. And I don't think Theresa May wants to do that because she is too in bed with the hard Brexiters of her party.
Yeah, she won't. She definitely won't do that. Thanks for the call, man.